Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lost Minds podcast. My name's Emily.
I'm Anthony.
And today we are back for episode 4 of our show on the End the Two-Party System Network. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for your support. Today we are going to be talking about the Congressional Progressive Caucus's executive action agenda list that they put out recently. And yeah, just talking about our thoughts about that whole topic. So anything you'd like to add before we get started?
No, thank you everybody who's tuning in and watching, and looking forward to the episode.
Cool.
Look forward to it.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, we are going to be talking about this because it's an important issue that I think will help us understand a little bit more about even the folks that we think are supporting us in the Democratic Party are truly not. And I think this is a really good example of that. So yeah, we're just going to go through this list and kind of see what each agenda item looks like, what has in it, and our kind of takes on it. So the left-wing Congressional Progressive Caucus, they unveiled this highly anticipated list of suggested executive orders on Thursday, and it outlined some strategies for Joe Biden to advance Democrats' policy priorities in a legislative agenda in order to do better in midterms in 2022. So this list covers, according to The Guardian, we're reading off a Guardian article, but this list covers a wide range of progressive wish list items, which it really doesn't. Maybe progressive Democrats within the Democratic Party, but as far as folks on the left, it really doesn't cover much. But things that are in this wish list of items include lowering healthcare costs, canceling federal student loan debt, and reducing America's dependence on fossil fuels. It also calls for raising wages in some ways. We'll talk about kind of how that isn't great later, but also talks about reducing police violence by establishing national standards for law enforcement officers. So more police reform instead of defunding the police or any other additional measures that we can take to actually stop police violence. So that's where we're at with it. And we're just going to go kind of line by line in this list now and kind of talk a little bit about what is all in it and how it is not actually super progressive for leftists on the new left and kind of our problems with it. So first of all, I just want to say that this should have happened a long time ago. And it wasn't when Biden was elected. It should have been done before any person, especially the leaders in the Democratic Party, the progressives, Bernie Sanders, AOC, the whole squad, before any of them committed to pushing their voting bases into voting for him, this should have been done. So we should have had a list of executive orders that were required for Joe Biden to commit to before we gave him our vote in November of 2020.
Are they doing this to like save face, kind of, because they kind of see the writing on the wall, so that when they get slaughtered in the midterms, the progressives can be like, "Well, we tried. I mean, look at this list that we came out with.
Yeah,
2
they
years
are
too late."
It goes back to this kind of topic that we talked about in our second episode of like the ratchet effect. This is what they do. They wait until the very last second in order to sway elections so they can do that lesser of two evils voting again of look at what we can accomplish. If you vote Democrat in 2022, we can't accomplish this if you don't vote Democrat because we're not going to win the midterm elections because Joe Biden hasn't done anything. So we're going back to that whole concept that we talked about before of they do nothing the whole time they're in office. And then once it gets right back to elections and they need your vote, that's when they start catering to you and trying to appeal to you. And for people on the new left, this stuff doesn't even jump out to me. This very much feels like what a corporate Democrat would propose during election season. This does not seem like something that should come from the progressive caucus of, Congress. This seems like something that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, kind of like what Joe Biden did in the general election. Like he really talked about canceling student loan debt and doing all of these semi-progressive things in order to get elected. So it really reminds me of all these like half measures, very much so a reformist kind of list of executive actions instead of something that the progressive part of the Democratic Party should be putting out. So it absolutely is that. And it really has to tie in between the rotating villain and the ratchet effect and just kind of how the Democratic Party election cycle works and the two-party system election cycle as well. But that's kind of how it works, and we're seeing it in this.
Yeah, and like from just at face value, kind of looks like none of this stuff really threatens the like capitalists that kind of run the country.
Mm-mm.
Even like
It
it's
doesn't.
all very just, hey, peasants, please don't be too mad at us.
Yeah.
Especially a year from now when the
Yeah.
Republicans run everything again.
The best part of this list of executive actions is probably the canceling student loan debt. They are very explicit in saying canceling all federal student loan debt, not a portion,
Oh, really?
not for certain people. That is one
Wow.
part that they were very explicit on. But that's probably the only thing about it that is truly, to my knowledge, like very socialist, very like outwardly leftist and progressive. Other than that, everything is pretty much a half measure. It's not to say that these things won't help some sections of people or maybe some people who need it, but it definitely isn't helping all people. And as we talked about in the first episode of the show, we don't believe that any community is disposable. So when we do these half measures, it leaves some communities out, and it does leave some communities to be disposable. And we don't believe in that. So to us, this isn't addressing a lot of things that folks would want. And also, the way that I had to read through this a few times, I also looked at a few articles that, were kind of interpreting this. They also have kind of a one pager on the Congressional Progressive Caucus's website about this, kind of putting it all into some simpler terms. But to me, this doesn't speak to the American people. This is very like procedural stuff that like if an average Joe person read would not understand what they're asking for or why they're asking for it. A lot of these things they don't understand. Regular people don't know a lot about what even the problems that they're trying to address are related to these issues. So to me, it just seems it would be much easier to say, hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic, sign Medicare for all. We don't need to tax the people. We don't need to figure out a tax loophole. You have the money to do it. It's a very like modern monetary theory of way of doing it, but it is the correct way to pass Medicare for all. Like, pass Medicare for all, sign the executive order, cancel student loan debt, raise the minimum wage to this much beyond $15 an hour if we're being realistic. So it's a lot of these things can be very confusing, it seems like to me as well, which seems like a tactic to me of, hey, let's pick the most tiny problems to solve that regular people really don't know about, and then throw a few in there that maybe they do know about that'll make them feel good about this. But overall, in actuality, we're not really doing anything to largely change people's lives. And also, again, this is really just they could have done this before he got elected. They could have done this right after he got elected, as their promise was to push him to the left, and they chose not to. So, of course, they're doing this in almost the summer of 2022, right before everyone's about to start campaigning for the midterm elections. So this is not a coincidence. This came out at this time for a reason, but this should have happened a long time ago, and it shouldn't have happened to push Biden to the left. It should have been done and waited until the very last second, after Biden was threatened into making these concessions, to go deeper than they are right now. Like, they should have had this list and said, okay, initially we said we wanted you to do this, and it's right before the November election. We actually want you to do this, and you're not going to get your votes unless you do this, and just continuing to push him farther and farther before people voted for him. Once they have your votes, they don't have to do anything for you. So that's another reason why you're seeing it come up now, is because we're about to go into those elections. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Overall, I would say that this is a very like, let me pander to you kind of, I'm a corporate den, let me pander to you during election season kind of list to me. A lot of it doesn't seem very progressive in my sense, for folks that are involved in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And there are a lot of organizations who are supporting this: People's Action, the Working Families Party, a lot of different of these, like Our Revolution, which isn't really progressive anymore, as we know, because they've done a huge restructuring. But a lot of these organizations who we saw as very big progressive figures are falling for this and are supporting this. And we talked about last week about how a lot of these organizations will sheep herd people into the Democratic Party, give them a false sense of hope, and do nothing for them. We're seeing that with this as well. So anything else you want to add before we just jump in to the list?
Yeah, like, I mean, even going back to when Biden beat Bernie in the primary or whatever, um I just remember a lot of people on the left saying back then, like, oh, please don't just give Biden your support. Like, actually make him agree to like a certain amount of executive orders, or he doesn't get your endorsement. Which, if you didn't get Bernie's endorsement, then he wouldn't have gotten any of the left's endorsement. But Bernie just didn't do that, and neither did any of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And so, yeah, I mean, when they didn't do that, that's kind of their signal of being like, hey, we're not really gonna challenge Biden in any way, shape, or form. That's not even what this is doing. Like, this isn't to stick it to Biden or pressure him in any way. This is literally just to pander to people to get votes for the midterms, like we said. And yeah, it's disgusting. I'm not shocked.
Yeah, and we saw this last week that AOC was, I didn't read the full story or listen to any podcasts about it, but I did see a few headlines about her acknowledging and warning the Democrats that there was going to be a huge red wave in the midterm elections as a result of Biden not doing anything. And I think that she's saying this because this list has come out and she's a part of that caucus. And so I think she is saying it to support this list. But you're seeing them now come out and try to push Biden right before the midterm election so that, and I'm sure Joe Biden may do some of these things in order to be a part of the game. Like, I'm sure it is all a agreed upon thing of like, okay, y'all are going to do this. You're going to try to push Biden to do these things so that we can keep these leftists and these progressives as a part of the Democratic Party who still believe in the Democratic Party and still believe in the squad. And Biden's going to do one or two maybe good things, definitely not canceling student loan debt, definitely not doing all the big things in your list, but he'll do some of those small little concessions so that it can at least look like y'all did something good. We can keep those progressives and keep duping them into the Democratic Party, and Joe Biden can continue to govern as he is. And maybe we'll save some seats in the midterms. I still don't think they're going to hold a majority after the midterms, but they may save some seats as a result of this. It seems like it's a very big this is a huge plan in order to do it. So if you see in the next few weeks, like, okay, Joe Biden does listen to some parts of these lists, don't be surprised. To me, this seems like a very coordinated effort in order to get folks to vote for the Democrats in the midterms. But that's my assessment.
And
so
like the progressive Congressional Caucus, they're not really progressive or left. They're just more progressive than other Democrats are allowed to be. But again, it just kind of goes back to that's how the party's structured. It's so that because there's an understanding that there are a lot of left leaning or just full out lefties in America. So you have to sheep herd them into the Democratic Party because I mean they're not going to vote for a Republican ever. But this is how you do it right here is by doing dumb shit like this to just get people to
or they are
the
a part of the caucus because they individually don't take corporate money, but they take corporate money from the party. So some of them, there are loopholes in that. Like, okay, this is a progressive caucus of folks that don't take corporate money in their campaigns, but also they exchange corporate money by getting money from Sunrise Movement or getting money from these other progressive organizations or the party itself, Nancy Pelosi's money that she distributes to the party. So it really depends.
And you can still serve a corporation without taking money from them,
for sure,
which is what they do.
But people have gotten into that whole like, oh, I don't accept corporate money, and so then therefore we're on a good track. So that's kind of what it is. That's like the assessment of largely what this is doing, and then kind of the goal of this list and our assessment of the list initially. But I did make some notes about the individual sections of the list, so we're going to go into those a little bit deeper and kind of talk a little more about them. Some of them are very they really just don't make a lot of sense, or they don't give a ton of background as to why they're highlighting these specific issues, which I think is intentional because, again, I think they're trying to confuse people into supporting what they're asking for Joe Biden to do. But the first one that they go over is healthcare, lowering healthcare costs, things like that. Obviously, there's no mention of Medicare for all, which from the progressive caucus, you would expect some mention of it. But as we know, AOC and the majority of the squad never talk about Medicare for all. They don't say the words Medicare for all anymore. So they don't bring this up at all in this section of the action list that they have. They do mention quickly transitioning away from ACO REACH, which, if you don't know, is a program for direct contracting entities. So these direct contracting entities, it basically is a way to privatize Medicare. It's a longer issue that I won't go into right now, but if you want to look it up, they originally were Biden was trying to privatize Medicare. Basically, they contract out, it's like private contracts to these different firms that manage Medicare payouts and
That's
Medicaid
insanity.
payouts. But I don't, like I said, I won't get into it. It's kind of complicated, but look it up if you're interested in learning more about it. Shoot, I'll look, it's PNHP. I don't remember the acronym, what it means, but look up pnhp.org. They have a whole section on DCEs and ACO REACH if you're interested in learning more about it. But basically that does say that they would like them to transition away from ACO REACH and changing the current determination of eligibility for families' ACA premium subsidies, which is based on whether the available employer-sponsored insurance is affordable for the employee rather than for the whole family. So basically making it a little bit more easy for families to pay for their health care, because employer-sponsored insurance is much more affordable typically for the individual employee than it is for a whole family to be on it. This is how it is with my mom's health insurance. She pays hundreds of dollars every single paycheck in order to have our whole family on her insurance. So that is one section of it, which I don't necessarily think is a bad ask. And that you'll see this a lot in this list, is that these things aren't necessarily bad things. We're not saying that this shouldn't be the case. Yes, we should stop trying to privatize Medicare and Medicaid. That's an obvious thing, but that's also a very basic no-brainer kind of ask. So we want them to push to do more. Like I said, being in part of the progressive Congressional Caucus means that you need to be doing more. So they do say that, which is a good thing. We should be transitioning away from DCEs and ACO REACH as much as we possibly can. And that's something that Biden can stop right away. But also you'll see a lot in this list, they have a lot of weaselly words and phrases. So quickly transitioning away from, there's no timeline, there's no guarantee. They have a lot of language like that in this as well. They also talk about lowering drug costs, and they quote it as decisively ending the global pandemic. And a lot of this relates to vaccine mandates and things like that. So it pretty much strictly has to do with expanding access to the vaccine in this letter, and really has nothing to do with allowing for remote work, allowing for more paid time off, things like that. There is a little bit of mention on paid time off lower down in the list, but as far as COVID related strategies, there's nothing about any other COVID related strategy, other medications that they'll make available for people to treat COVID, getting COVID tests out for free for people, nothing about requiring masks anywhere, nothing in order to slow the spread of COVID other than getting a vaccine. So that again is just another red flag to me. So that's pretty much the whole healthcare section. It really talks about ending DCEs, lowering prices for ACA, so very ACA focused, and then lowering drug costs in some weird ways. That was also, again, very confusing. And all the COVID discussion, or how they view ending the COVID pandemic, is all strictly through expanding access to the vaccine. So that's that section. Do you have any other comments on the healthcare part?
No, not really. Just other than this is really the legacy that Obama left. Is he made Medicare for all such an impossible thing to even discuss in the mainstream years later, which I'm sure was kind of the plan there. The ACA is this uh golden thing that has to be protected at all costs. And I mean, that's what they use to trick people into voting for them. It's like, oh, the Republicans are going to take away the Affordable Care Act and we're all going to be screwed. And that's partly due to how glorified the Affordable Care Act was when it came out and was rolled out by the media and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
damn.
And again, like a lot of this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like the lowering cost of prescription drugs includes like insulin, EpiPens, and HIV and AIDS treatments. Those are not like bad things, but also we should have that for free anyway. It shouldn't be
go look up
about
what people have to
lowering
pay in
it.
other countries.
Yeah,
Like,
it shouldn't
it's
be about lowering
insulting.
these costs. It should be about giving these medications to people because they need it and because that's a human right for them to have it. So, again, for a progressive list of executive actions, this is not progressive at all. This is very much so, hey, I'm a centrist Dem, and so I'm going to pander to the people in order to get votes in the midterm elections. So, just very disappointing in that
they
aspect.
very consciously understand that they have the power to make this stuff virtually free for the individual.
For sure.
And they don't do it. They're like, we'll do it 50%,
right.
Which is like, is that worse than being like, no, we're not doing it at all?
Yes. It's no, because yes, it does. Like I said, it does give access. A lot of these things will give access to more people. But in that realm, who's being left out? And then that's exactly how like certain marginalized communities are left out, unhoused people are left out, and people of color are left out, and all these different communities are left out because yes, you're making it more affordable to the working class white family. I hate to say that, but that really is what it is. I remember a lot of times when like my family was on food stamps, like they would lower the income to, they wouldn't just give you food stamps if you needed them. They had an income threshold that you had to meet. And if you were even a few dollars away from that income requirement, you above it, you would not be able to get your food stamps. So, okay, I'm sorry, but $5 extra past your threshold doesn't mean that I can buy groceries for my family. And so many times my family was denied food stamps because of that, and denied assistance because of that. We were denied because of the place that we lived at one point as well, that we were living beyond our means, living in a more affluent, town. So it just it these are all incremental things which yes help some people but also leave a lot of people out who are still struggling.
Right.
And for a progressive caucus, you would think that they would do more to do that. At least that's what they say, and that when they are campaigning, that's what they say they're going to do. So it's all just kind of that trick.
Yeah.
And then the next section is about canceling student loan debt. Again, this is kind of the best one that they've had so far. Let me go ahead and pull up what exactly they say about this. It was pretty good, is from what I remember. Sorry y'all, one sec. But yeah, basically they just say like, yeah, we want you to cancel student loan debt. From what I remember, put money back in the pockets of millions of Americans who are stuck in the student debt trap, preventing them from buying homes, starting families, yada yada. They give a whole problem list. By using existing executive authority under Section 432A of the Higher Education Act of 1965 to cancel federal student loan debt. So that's like very explicit. There's no concessions, there's no like little things in there. It's just very explicit to cancel federal student loan debt. There's no, for certain people, only half of it. It just says it very explicitly. Now, it does leave out people who have other loans other than federal student loans, but at least that's one part that they are saying that they can cancel. So that was a good thing in my mind. That was probably the best part of it. And this is the only part that they do explicitly say, like, explain the issue and why it needs to happen before making the demand, which I thought was really interesting. Like, they go into this one saying it prevents people from buying homes and it prevents people from starting families, but the other ones don't have a lot of that explanation. And I don't know if that is designed, because that's the only ask in this list that to me stands out as something that regular people would be like, yes, that's what we want. That's what we've been asking for. All these other things, like I said, people might be going, I didn't realize that was a problem and I don't know anything about that. So cool. If they think that's a good thing to do, go ahead and do it.
It's also, to
it
me,
just seems, I don't know.
Biden is not gonna touch that issue, and everybody knows it. So, I mean, it's just weird that that's the one that they are explicitly like very detailed on, and they lay out how it affects like the average everyday American.
Yeah.
But that's like, we know that he's not going to do anything with this. So
Well,
Yeah, I mean that's what it looks like to me
it's
anyway.
great. I mean, like that. I wish that they would have more of that in there, though, and I wish that they would leverage their votes in order to get
Oh
this
yeah,
kind of
me too.
stuff. Like, even during the midterms, they still have ways that they can leverage their bases in order to force Joe Biden to do these things. They have so many different so many followers on their social media accounts. There's no way that they can't say, hey, call Joe Biden, call the White House, do these things. Let's put on this organizing campaign in order to force him to do these things, because we know we're going to lose the midterms if we don't do so. So I think that there needs to be more of that. Like, I was excited to see that. No, he probably won't do it, but there's also, that's the only thing that they're willing to come out and explicitly say anything about, because that has been such a big topic. Like, since Joe Biden has been in office, he didn't explicitly say he was going to, put Medicare for all on the floor. He would say he would veto it outright. But he did say he would cancel student loan debt. And so I think that their thought process is that's what we can go after, because that was an explicit campaign promise and an explicit kind of uh, offer to the left to come and vote for Joe Biden, So they're using that as a way. But yeah, they need to do more. Like, there needs to be more into that. Expanding worker power and raising wages. So they talk about raising wages in this section, but there's really nothing about like raising minimum wage to a specific number. Everything in this section is kind of subtle. It's not really specific or explicit at all. So, for example, they say like providing generous sick leave and overtime vacation and other benefits by strengthening service contract act regulations and guidance. Addressing misclassification of low-wage workers, and use existing authority to ensure that bidders prioritize retention and quality staffing. Which, if you're a regular person, first of all, you have no idea what that means. Like, that just
Right,
confuses
it's
you.
like whose interpretation of like generous
Yeah,
and
and that's the
stuff
other
like
thing.
that.
Like, what does generous sick leave mean?
Right.
What does overtime vacation, like, what does that mean? A lot of countries have explicit amounts of time that you have to be given certain sick leave requirements, or certain maternity leave, paternity leave. All of those kinds of things are very explicit in how much time you have to have, or you're offered to have to take. This is not very explicit at all. So he could say, okay, everyone gets an extra 2 days of sick leave. Everyone
Right.
gets an extra, like, it doesn't mean anything. And also, like I said, you can't really say that you're trying to raise wages if you're not going to explicitly try to raise the minimum wage, which Joe Biden can do in one stroke of a pen, and also having a specific number on it. And the reason that this is important is because so many of these progressives ran on a $15 minimum wage. We know that a $15 minimum wage isn't enough now, but you're not even trying to work towards a $15 minimum
Right.
wage. So what are you
15 was the
doing?
number like 10,
What is your
12 years
job?
ago.
Like, that's the thing. I think this is so frustrating because, and I know that not everyone in the progressive Congressional Caucus is in support of these types of things, but the squad itself can go out and make its own list of just the squad has enough supporters to do more than what this list could even
Oh
do.
yeah.
Like, it's so frustrating to see that they're part of this, and also that a lot of these organizations are supporting it, because it's like, are y'all reading? Like, do you know how to read? And have you actually read this? Because this to me does not seem, like I said, a lot of these organizations, Our Revolution, Working Families Party, People's Action, all these organizations are so incrementalists now. They're so willing to leave out certain communities and certain people in order to get the more affluent white working class voters in order to stay in the Democratic Party. It's absolutely insane. And this has been a strategy for a long time of trying to pander to Republicans instead of trying to get their base to come out and support them. The people that are actually struggling. They're trying to get rich Republicans to come over to the Democratic
which is why
side.
they get destroyed by the Republican Party
Yeah.
all the time, because their base is super fired up and they know how to get them out there.
Right.
Oh boy.
They talk about advancing immigrant rights. So they talk a lot about like they say, providing relief to those coming from other countries in crisis, ensure a fair and humane asylum system by ending certain expulsions and reforming the immigration court system, raising wages and improving labor protection so employers can no longer use visa programs to underpay and exploit migrant and U.S. workers, and then ensure that those impacted by the Muslim ban are able to secure status, obtain lost green cards, and other basic services without additional barriers. So again, not all these things are bad things. Like, yes, people should have raised wages. There should be an improved labor protections. We should also explicitly acknowledge a wage that needs to be a minimum wage. And need to get rid of like asylums in general, detention centers in general. They talk a lot about like not having federal detention centers anymore. And they talk about that as well in like the police section of like getting rid of federal, or private prisons, or getting rid of contracts with private prisons, but still having prisons. So for a new leftist, for someone who is like against capitalism, against imperialism, abolishing the police, abolishing prisons, all these things, this doesn't mean anything to us. Maybe for leftists who are like democratic socialists, who are totally okay with capitalism in some aspects, but this doesn't mean anything. And then I also want to point out the fact that a lot of these squad members and the members of this progressive caucus have also explicitly campaigned on abolishing ICE. There is nothing in this about abolishing ICE, not one thing. I don't know. I don't remember if Joe Biden was ever explicit about support or against ICE. I don't know if you remember. I don't want to claim anything unless I know for sure, but I think that would be something that,
I don't think so.
yeah, I wouldn't think so either, but I would think that that'd be something he'd want to pander to. You know what I mean? So I would at least expect them to put it on the list. And that's the thing, is that that's the other thing about this list, is that not all these things, he's not going to do all these things. They're acting as if they're going to give him this list and he's going to be like, oh, great ideas. Let me just check this all off. He's not going to do all these things. So why not you can keep everything on this list if you want to, but put some of those more explicit campaign things on there as well, because you need to show him and show the country that you're still fighting for these things, that these aren't just half measures, that like, hey, Joe Biden, we're not just giving up on those because we know you won't vote for them, or we know you won't do those things.
Yeah, no, I agree.
You still need to put them on there.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
No, you're right.
So I don't know. And again, you can leverage your vote. Just because you think Joe Biden won't do it, or we know Joe Biden won't do it, doesn't mean that it won't get people out to vote for the Democrats, or not out to vote for Democrats. And maybe this is the way that we wake people up to not voting for Democrats, is by showing them that, hey, Joe Biden doesn't want to abolish ICE. Joe Biden doesn't want to give you Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic. When are you going to get Medicare for all if not in the middle of a pandemic? How are you, like, yes, our minimum wage should be probably up to $30 or $40 an hour at this point. He's not even giving you 15. He's not even willing to talk about 15. So putting those things on there, at least explicitly, again, it's kind of like the force the vote strategy. It lets people know explicitly what he does and does not support, because he can't pander to people anymore. He's already in office. He doesn't need anyone else's votes right now. He doesn't need to pander to people. So this is the time to show people what he supports and what he doesn't. In my opinion, this is, even if he's not going to sign these things, this is a way to move policy forward in the long term. So,
right.
And I don't know.
They just never use opportunities like this to explain to the American people why these things are like very common sense. Like Medicare for all, like just things like that are such like a duh. Even like other countries that don't have as much like capital and money like circulating through its economy like we do. They always just say it like the abolishing like prisons and the minimum wage needing to be more than $15 an hour. Or, like, they just say things like that, like raise minimum wage, without explaining it, so that, like conservatives and people on the right are just like, man, that's stupid. And they convince a lot of people that might actually hear details about why it could help them. And I mean, it just doesn't push the ball any further. It doesn't.
They don't ever talk about these things and try to educate, which a lot of these things you don't need to educate people on anymore anyway. Like, you don't need to educate people on Medicare for all. You just need to do something about it. The majority of the country supports it. But they also don't talk about it unless it's an election season. Like, I haven't heard AOC talk about Medicare for all or educate people about Medicare for all since she originally was elected in 2018. Like, they don't talk about it at all. But unless it's an election season, they don't touch it ever.
It's so easy too, just to really quick just say, if the minimum wage rose with worker productivity and inflation and things like that, it'd be at like $25-$30 an hour, just straight up. But
especially with the gas prices. This is such a good like everything is
yeah.
culminating together to just make such a good argument for all these things, and they're missing opportunities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why we're here. That's why independent media
Yeah.
is here, honestly. Um so after immigrant rights, they talk about delivering on the promise of equal justice under the law. So this is where they talk a lot about like police and the criminal justice system, things like that. So um, they talk about demilitarizing law enforcement by preventing transfer of certain military grade weapons. They talk about addressing mass incarceration by granting clemency to people who complied with the pandemic's home confinement program, regardless of their length of their service. If they did everything they were asked to do with the pandemic home program, then they would be offered clemency. Helping to reduce deadly force by police officers by establishing strict national standards and requiring data sharing on those forces, on that use of force from departments across the country. And then holding corporations accountable for price gouging, wage theft, workplace safety violations, and anti-union retaliation by developing an interagency task force to investigate, prosecute, and deter white-collar crime. Let me just say first, task forces do sorry, I almost swore. They do nothing. They do because I can't even express to you how much task forces are completely pointless and useless. They do nothing. They love to use the word task force. They love to put together a research team to make you feel like they're doing something. Task force makes you feel, yes, they're going to do something. It's a task force. It doesn't do anything. It researches and it gives recommendations and it doesn't implement anything. And after they give the recommendations and do the research, it's up to that person, whoever put on the task force, whether it's and this happens a lot in student spaces as well. Universities and administrations will hear that there's an issue on campus. They'll set up a task force to research it and gather information and give recommendations. And then the university administration will do nothing about it. This is the same situation. Task forces do nothing. There were task forces that were established before Biden was president that was supposed to do the research and the implementation and the recommendations. They do nothing. There is no anchor that suggests that that person who's going to establish the task force has to do any of the recommendations that they give. So task forces do nothing. This white collar crime thing, even if he said, yep, let's do that thing, it's not going to do anything. So the fact that they put this on the list is showing how much they are catering to corporations. They don't.
It's also so that he can adopt this and it'll do nothing. But
Yeah,
he can.
but they love to use you have to watch out for the language because they love to use certain language to get people to think that this is going to do something. Never believe that there's going to be any material outcomes when you hear or see the word task force. You're never going to see anything material come out of that. From my experience as a student organizer, this is true. From my just knowledge and viewing what happens in the world whenever this happens at a governmental level, nothing is going to happen from it. It's a myth. Task forces don't do anything. So that's the first one. Helping to reduce deadly force by police officers by establishing strict national standards. We know that doesn't do anything. You can't reform the police. You cannot reform the police. I can't say that enough. Police started out as slave patrols. That is the root of police forces. It will always be that. There will always be that underlying root goal and acknowledgement of getting down on poor people, getting down on Black people, getting down on people who do drugs, who have fallen into the opioid epidemic. There's always that like part of protecting private property, protecting capitalism that will always be there.
There's also no like measure of accountability in that statement either. It's just national standards which are going to not be followed, and then what are you going to do about it?
And they also don't even explicitly offer national like what these national standards are going to be. There's no discussion or like no recommendations of what the national standards could be. So for Joe Biden, who wrote the crime bill, the original crime bill, wrote another crime bill that was horrendous, I don't really think his national standards are going to be too great. And why would the Progressive Caucus trust him to come up with those national standards?
Right.
I don't really see. Also, requiring data sharing of use of force. Yes, this doesn't happen a lot, but also we don't need to see it to know what's happening. We don't need the data to know what happens. We know based off of social media, who has been a great tool in showing us police brutality, that this stuff happens. You don't need the data to know that it happens. We just need to do something about it. Like, Black people who are suffering from police violence and murder don't need you to see the data in order to know that we need to defund the police. We need to abolish the police. People who are on the new left support abolishing the police and abolishing prisons and at least defunding. Like, that's the basic of is defunding the police. And I think a majority of
there's no education on community policing.
Right.
There's nothing. Like, they don't give a shit about anything like that, and this is all just to save face and be like, look who we're championing.
If they cared about this, they would be talking about Medicare for all. If they wanted to lower crime, if they wanted to stop police violence, they would be talking about Medicare for all. They would be talking about raising wages. They would be talking about community centers. They'd be talking about not community police forces, but more of like a community-based accountability. They'd be talking about transformative justice. They'd be talking about all these different topics that they're not talking about because they know, and I don't know if they're choosing these things, again, because they know Joe Biden wouldn't do it, or if they're, but regardless, you need to put it on there. You need to move the national conversation, because this is part of, again, that ratchet effect that we're going to move everything to the right. We're the Progressive Caucus, and we were supporting defunding the police when George Floyd happened. And now we're talking about reducing deadly force by increasing the national standards. We're not talking about defunding the police, which Joe Biden gave more to police funding just few months ago, correct?
Right.
Am I wrong? Okay, so we're not talking about taking that back. We're not talking about the Pentagon budget, which we're going to talk about on our channel next, if y'all want to check that out. But we're not talking about any of those things. We're not talking about the and maybe they don't want to acknowledge that they've been a part of this, the squad approving the Capitol Police budget increase. Like, maybe they're trying to get them out of that conversation because they'd look like hypocrites. Regardless, we're here to call it out, and this isn't going to do anything for people. So all the white people who supported, all the squad members who supported defunding the police and the George Floyd conversation are going to be crickets on this. Working Families Party, Our Revolution, People's Action, who came out specifically in support of George Floyd and, holding police accountable and stopping white supremacy, are supporting this. So let that sit with you, because it means nothing to them. These movements mean nothing to them. Absolutely nothing. They do it to save face. They do it for clout. They do it to let you give them more donations. They do it to give you your volunteer hours, your hard-earned time that you have to relax, to rest, to spend time with your family outside of the hellhole that you work in. And they do nothing for you. So let that sit with you, because that part of this list really gets to me. Especially after the summer of action that we had, especially after the fact that so many Black activists and folks came out to try to really change the conversation on this topic, and they didn't hear any of it. Because
they heard it, they just don't care.
No, they just don't care. But they really didn't hear it. Did they really hear it? No, they heard it to respond. They heard it to know how to respond and not be canceled.
They heard it to wave you off.
Yeah. So this is just one of those instances where you can see this party is not reformable. There is no amount of progressive folks that can come in here and change this party. No amount. Let it go. Move on. Acknowledge you were wrong. Acknowledge it's not going to happen. Deal with it however you must. Move the fuck on. It just is what it is. Sorry. But that just really gets to me. Especially being an activist, I know how much hard work this is, and I'm not a Black activist, and I know how much effort and time that they put into it.
You're not a professional.
I don't understand it. I don't understand that work that they were doing, but I do know that I saw it, and I know how devastating it was for a lot of them, and it's just awful to see that this is what's happening now as a result. So there's that. My rant is over. Sorry. But
that just, it shows how how propagandized we all are for like violence and things like that, because like a normal reaction to seeing somebody get shot like 8 or a dozen times by a cop while they're handcuffed
More
or
than that,
something.
some of these stories.
Right. The natural response to be like, whoa, we got to make sure that this never happens again. And that just isn't that in this country. There's no urgency behind anything that involves death and destruction.
Yeah.
But everybody freaks
racism-
out about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock and shit
Right.
like that.
But
It's
that's
so weird.
And I think that we're missing part of that. I think there's a lot of reasons to that, but part of it is that
Oh, yeah,
racism
but-
is so deeply connected to capitalism. And in order to address racism fully, we have to break away from capitalism. We have to acknowledge what capitalism's roots are as well in racism. And I think a lot of white people aren't willing to do that. I think some people of color aren't willing to do that. And that's just the reality of the situation. But it's just really saddening to see that this is the Progressive Caucus that got you to vote for. I don't know how many times I was shamed into trying to vote for Joe Biden because of BLM. I mean, the list it goes on and on. I was told like I was a bad person. I was told I was a white supremacist. I was told all these different things because I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden, simply because Donald Trump was going to disappear activists and he was going to make BLM, police violence worse. You're not getting that. That was just false. And you're saying that now. Not only is Joe Biden not doing anything about it, but your progressive heroes aren't doing anything about it. So let that sit with you. Let this be a lesson, this specific point on this list. We spent a lot of time on that point. So just reiterating, the next one was demilitarizing law enforcement. That's, again, a bare minimum, like a bare minimum ask. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also a bare minimum. That should be a no-brainer. There needs to be more strong asks on this list. And then also talking about providing clemency for these people. So again, not necessarily a bad thing. There needs to be deeper ask for that as well. These people need to be fully pardoned. They need to have a fresh start. Their records need to be wiped clean. For a lot of these people, they are nonviolent drug offenders. They're just nonviolent offenders in general. Maybe their crime doesn't have anything to do with drug use or anything, but they're nonviolent offenders. So they really just need to have their whole slates wiped clean in general.
Agreed.
But yeah, so there just needs to be more in this section. There's no mention of defunding the police at the very minimum. I didn't expect them to put abolishing the police on there or abolishing prisons, but there's no mention of defunding the police. And we just had a summer 2 years ago of talking about defunding the police, and they were all so in support of that on the progressive, side of things, and are now doing nothing to do any of that or even to talk about it, move the conversation.
This whole thing is such a dud. Like anything that the squad or like the left in Congress does is just so milquetoast. And you know what, squad?
Yeah.
You're boring. You're boring.
I'm going to try to find that clip and put it.
You're boring.
You're boring. So next we're going to go into the climate crisis and what it says about our fossil fuel dependence. So this part of the list says explicitly combating the climate crisis and reducing fossil fuel dependence. So again, we're the Progressive Caucus, and we're talking about reducing
real dodgy with
fossil fuel dependence. So yeah, that's the first thing that is a red flag to me. Like just the use of the word reduce is a huge red flag for a Progressive Caucus. It talks about declaring a ban on new fossil fuel leases and on federal lands and waters and in environmental justice communities. So all the existing fossil fuel leases, we're good with those. Those can stay. That's totally fine. But we are going to declare a ban on any new fossil fuel leases. So line 3, line 5, I think one of it was the Dakota Access Pipeline or one of them that he got rid of, but then brought back or something. So all of those ones, totally cool. Like we can keep all of those. The tar sand, plants that they have, and we're all good. No problem there. All the Marathon petroleum plants that have been polluting people in Detroit where we live for years now, causing people to have cancer, other diseases, all that stuff. Those are totally fine. Any new ones though, yeah, no, we're not good with those. So again, half measures, incrementalism, It's in the
That
name.
that shit
It's in the
is literally
title.
gonna kill us. Like,
We're trying to reduce. It's in the title. So right then and there. Anything else that's said below it is like, that means nothing.
right.
Literally means nothing. And these are the people who championed the Green New Deal. In order to get elected. So again, just one part of that. And then also investing in the next section is investing in care, economy, jobs, and standards. This is just a bunch of random stuff to me. They mentioned a few things for like childcare, raising wages for certain like childcare folks. It says expanding access to in-home care for veterans and creating union jobs. Great. Grow strong childcare worker unions, allowing workers to organize. Great, whatever. It says encouraging the implementation of Medicaid equal access rule that reflects the role of the workforce in ensuring access to health services. So I was, just for context, I was a certified nursing assistant and I used to work in a nursing home. And this, I'm reading off of the like one pager doc that they have. So a lot of this is reduced language, and the actual list, there's a little more. And in this section, they talk a lot about like raising standards for people who work in nursing homes to make sure that folks in nursing homes are treated more, with more care, treated better, all this different stuff, or, increasing standards to those things. But let me tell you that CNAs are the most underpaid, one of the most underpaid jobs in the healthcare industry. Like I was paid 10.25 when I was a CNA, working 10-hour shifts every single day of the week, doing extremely intensive work with long care patients and taking care of them. We were the lowest paid CNAs in our state in Michigan. I'm sure that there's a ton of CNAs that are paid way less in other states as well. So I just think it's funny that they're talking about, which it is not, again, is not a bad thing to increase standards for folks that they have better care, but also the standards are pretty high already. And the people who are doing this work are also being extremely underpaid. So maybe these workers would do a little bit more and would be willing to care for these people a little bit better if they weren't overworked and underpaid. But we're not willing to raise their wages. We're just willing to increase the high standards that are put on them. So I wanted to point that out in this section. Other than that, it seems like a bunch of random stuff. Like we're talking about investing in the economy and job standards, and we're talking about like just childcare workers and just allowing them to unionize. We're just going to allow them to unionize as if that shouldn't already be a thing. Like, so really, again, just kind of random stuff here. Nothing that the people would jump out and say like, yes, this is something I've been fighting for a really long time. And then the last part is regulate for economic and tax fairness. So again, this just doesn't really seem like enough. Nothing really stands out in this section. It's a lot of like stuff that even I, to be quite honest, wouldn't even know. It like talks about like closing loopholes that allows Wall Street executives to pay lower taxes, reversing Trump era regulations. I don't know if that means that older regulations would also be included in that. But for like offshore tax loopholes, stuff like that. And then also talking about public companies being required to disclose information about greenhouse gas emissions. So they can still do so. They just have to disclose it to everyone. So again, just a bunch of random stuff and stuff that just seems like it's not enough. Like none of it really stands out. So that's the whole list. And I think that overall, like I would say, this list is absolutely ridiculous. It's a complete joke. I haven't seen anything that's more of a joke than this, to be quite honest, come from. Maybe I have, but for them to pretend that this is such a huge battle that they're fighting and win that they're trying to get is just insane to me. And I really wanted to focus too heavily on the organizations that are supporting this, namely the Working Families Party and Our Revolution, who we know is very like reformist, but also still stands out to me as something that's wrong. And then also like People's Action, all these different really seemingly progressive organizations that have a lot of people. Let me tell you, I've been a part of some of these. I was kind of working with People's Action for a little bit. I've dabbled in some of these when I did work for a lot of progressive folks in the Democratic Party, when I still subscribe to that. And these people who are involved deeply believe in these organizations, and they deeply believe in change, and they are struggling. Like, these are not people, some of the people that are involved in DSA and these organizations are well off and they don't understand the struggles of people, and that is true. But there are also a lot of people in these organizations who really believe that these organizations are doing something for them, and they truly need support and help because they are struggling so hard. And it just kills me. It literally kills me.
That's sad
to see that these organizations are supporting something like this. Like I said, not everything in this list is awful. It's not. But this list doesn't go far enough. The only good thing out of this list is canceling student loan debt. And there are plenty of other areas and avenues to this list that they could have had much stronger demands. And to be quite honest, I haven't seen a huge organizing strategy around getting this list even accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, to me, this just seems like a political theater.
It's not 2002 anymore. You can't just be like, hey, we're for good things.
Right.
And they're for bad things. Vote for us. Yeah. No, like, give us details. Mm-hmm. Dude, like, what the heck?
Yep.
Like,
and do something.
Can't just trust you based on your word or some stupid ass bill that you just conjured up. I hear people
always talk about, like, how dare you come after AOC and Corey, but like, they're activists. They're elected activists. It's like, why don't they show it then? If you're an activist and you're an organizer, I'm an activist. I'm an organizer. I organize with 3 different organizations currently, few that are national and a few that are in Michigan. This is not how you organize. I'm telling you right now, they want to get down on people for March for Medicare for All, for not being professional organizers and activists, for not being good enough, for not having the right credentials, for not knowing the right people. Y'all know all of those things. Y'all have all those things, and you don't do anything. You don't do anything that regular organizers do. I don't see you building relationships with people. I don't see you mobilizing your base. I don't see you doing any of that. So you don't know anything about organizing. You don't know anything about activism. And all you do is want to get people down. So the people that are actually trying to combat the Democratic Party, the 2-party system, and all you're trying to do is tear those people down and burn those people out. There's so many situations in this country that burn people out already. Capitalism and what's going on internationally, and people's families that live internationally, and just the idea of having to work a job that works you 6 to 7 days a week. You don't have any time for yourself, your family, to work on your passions, to take care of yourself. And then we're all preached about self-care and how much we need to do self-care. It's like, honestly, like grow up, like be attached to reality. That's not the reality of the situation. And honestly, they don't have any high ground to talk about organizing with other people and what other people are doing. And that's just what it is. Like, I haven't even seen them organize to get this list done. And this list came out last week, maybe the week before that. And I haven't seen a huge phone banking campaign. I haven't seen a rally being, advertised. And if it is advertised, I haven't seen it. And let me tell you, I'm on Twitter all the time. So if it was advertised and it is something that they'd be doing, I should have seen it by now.
It was covert.
I should have seen it by now. AOC is plenty friendly with CNN. We should have seen it by now. Like, I'm sorry,
but
it
job,
is what it
progressives.
is.
You pissed Emily off today.
Got me in that mood.
God.
I'm fired up. But yeah, that's the list. That's the big thing. This is a big topic. Again, I think a lot of people are going to think that this is good. And the idea of having a list of executive actions that you're trying to push Biden to achieve is a good thing. The stuff in this list is an extreme half measure. This is really just, to me, this is them trying to save face and build clout for the Democratic Party so that they can somewhat save some seats in the midterms.
And once again, they completely alienate themselves because, our conservatives and like libertarians and people, they're going to be like, oh my God, look at what the communists and the progressive caucus want to do. And then the people who are actually like Marxist Leninists like us are mad at you. So everybody's just going to be pissed at you. So it's like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
There's no strategy behind any of this. It's, there
isn't.
You hate to see it.
It's political theater.
Yeah.
It's political theater. So, absolutely. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Real.
Yeah, y'all are amazing as always. Definitely check out the links in the description. Last episode, I linked some mutual aid efforts. I'm still going to link those again in our future episodes. So there's mutual aid efforts that you can support that are already existing. There's also a link down there for finding mutual aid efforts in your own region, in your own state. So if you'd like to find somewhere to get involved, definitely use that to look up some mutual aid funds and efforts. And yeah, go around, like we always say, talk to people, get to know your neighbors, get to know your friends, build relationships with people, and talk about what we can really start doing to get shit done,
And
and
don't
change
trust
it. And
anybody
yeah,
in any of these two
yep,
parties.
especially with this stuff going on recently. Like, if you're a leftist and you're listening to this show and you tune into the show because you're a leftist, uh, take all this with a grain of salt and really watch what's going to happen with this list in the next few weeks. I'm pretty positive our predictions will come true. And what this list is really about, and just try to educate the people that around it.
And look at how watch how much effort the squad starts putting in when the midterms are over and the Republicans
Yeah.
have the House and
Yep.
the Senate. They're gonna be going nuts.
It's all going to flip to
Yep.
now we can't do anything. Now we have an ineffective president because of that situation.
And they're also, I mean, it's gonna be like how they were when Trump was in office, how
Mhm.
they were always.
And now they're probably gonna be more explicit in bringing up abolishing ICE and Medicare for all, and it's now
Absolutely.
gonna come back. All those buzzwords are gonna come back up.
Mhm.
So yeah, just watch out for that stuff. Get involved in direct action, get involved in mutual aid. We always say that. Register with a third party. We're hoping to get I'm looking into right now getting some different candidates on our podcast, possibly in the near future. So yeah, look into some third parties and just do the work, whatever work you can, in order to move your friends and family into not supporting the two-party system anymore. So that's all for us. That's all for us this episode, and we will chat with y'all next week. Our new schedule is going to be uploading probably on Mondays, so look out for that. But we will see you all next Monday, and let us know in the description what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want us to talk about. We will see you then. Thank you so much.